My name is Clarissa Moretti, and this is the story of how a 14-year-old boy, my neighbor, made me a promise that forever changed my daughter's life. A promise that doctors, even today, cannot explain. It was the summer of 2004 when we moved into that apartment on Corso Indipendenza in Milan, an elegant building, one of those with heavy dark wooden doors and marble staircases that always smell of wax. My husband Stefano had just gotten a promotion at his company, and we could finally afford something bigger for ourselves and for Alessia, our daughter. She was 6 years old then, all chestnut curls and hazel eyes full of curiosity. She was a lively child, always moving, always with 1,000 questions. Mommy, why is the sky blue? Mommy, where do the little birds go at night? Mommy, can I have a puppy? I remember our first day in that building. As we were going up with the boxes, we met an elegant woman, about 45, with a kind smile. Welcome, she said. I'm Antonia Acutis. I live on the 3rd floor with my husband Andrea and our son Carlo. Behind her, a thin boy with slightly messy dark hair greeted us with a shy nod. He was wearing a red polo shirt and had a backpack on his shoulders. Hi, he said simply, and then added, speaking to Alessia, do you like computers? My daughter nodded enthusiastically, even though at that age she barely knew how to turn on our old PC. Carlo smiled. One day I'll show you a project I'm working on. I'm cataloging all the Eucharistic miracles in the world. I didn't quite understand what he meant, but he seemed like a well-mannered boy, perhaps a bit unusual with those glasses and that serious air for his age. At that moment, I couldn't imagine that this boy would become our lifeline. The first year in the new apartment was wonderful. Alessia had started 1st grade at Dante Alighieri School, not far from home. She'd been accepted without problems, a bright and sociable child who won everyone over with her smile. She made friends with the neighborhood children in an instant. There was Sofia, the pharmacist's daughter from the floor below, and Matteo, the Rossini family's son from the 2nd floor. Together they played in the building's interior courtyard, the one with the little fountain in the center and stone benches where grandparents sat chatting in summer. Alessia went to ballet on Tuesdays and Thursdays at the Tersicore Academy on Via Mascheroni. She always came back excited, still dressed in her pink leotard and tutu, showing me the steps she'd learned. Mommy, look! The teacher says, I have the perfect swan neck, she'd say. Pirouetting around the living room, Stefano would laugh and applaud her, and I thought there was nothing more beautiful in the world than that pure happiness. She was full of energy, one of those children who never stay still. In the morning, she'd wake up very early. Already at 6:30, she'd be in our bed jumping. Mommy, Daddy, time to get up. The sun's out. Even when it rained, even when it was still dark, Alessia found a reason to be excited. She had that contagious vitality that only truly healthy and happy children have. On Sunday mornings, we'd go to Mass together at the parish of Santa Maria Segreta. It was a beautiful church, with ancient frescoes and an atmosphere of peace that I liked. Alessia got a bit bored during the homily, I'll admit, and I had to remind her to behave. But during the consecration, strangely, she'd fall silent. She'd stare at the altar with those wide hazel eyes, as if she perceived something I didn't see. We often met the Acutis family. Carlo was always there, in the front row, with a concentrated expression during the consecration. It wasn't the forced concentration of a bored boy trying to look composed. It was total, absolute attention. His gaze was fixed on the host that the priest was raising, and his lips moved in silent prayer. I noticed he remained kneeling longer than others, completely absorbed. Even when everyone else had already sat down, he stayed there, kneeling, motionless like a statue. Once, after Mass, I asked Mrs. Antonia, "Your son is very devout for his age, isn't he?" She smiled with a mixture of pride and tenderness. Carlo has a special relationship with the Eucharist. He always says that Jesus is truly there, present. It's not just a symbol to him, it's everything. He comes here almost every day, even alone, just to stay before the tabernacle. That dedication struck me. At 14, how many boys go to church alone? How many choose to spend their free time in adoration instead of with video games or at the stadium? My mother, who often came to visit us from Bergamo, always told me, "That boy has something special. You can see he really prays, not like so many who go to Mass out of habit. And she was right. There was something different about Carlo. He wasn't just good or polite. He was luminous. Yes, that's the right word. He had an inner light that shone through his manner, his shy smile, the way he treated everyone with genuine kindness. I'd nod distractedly at my mother's comments. I was a practicing Catholic, yes, but my faith was ordinary, routine. Perhaps that's the more accurate word. I went to Mass because that's what you did. I recited prayers before bed because my mother had taught them to me as a child and the habit had remained. I respected the precepts, didn't eat meat on Fridays during Lent, went to confession once a year before Easter. But I'd never thought much beyond that. Religion was something you did, not something you lived intensely. It was part of my cultural identity, of being Italian, Milanese, part of a family tradition. But it wasn't something that truly touched my heart, that influenced my daily choices, that gave me real joy or consolation. Seeing Carlo, I sometimes felt a bit guilty. That boy lived his faith with an intensity that I, at 35, had never experienced. But then daily life would take over. Work at the boutique, bills to pay, groceries to do, Alessia to take to ballet, and I wouldn't think about these things anymore. Then came that May morning in 2005 that changed everything. It was a Tuesday. I remember it perfectly because it was ballet day. Alessia had woken up complaining of leg pain. "Mommy, they hurt," she said, whimpering, sitting on the edge of the bed with her little legs dangling. "Here," she pointed to her shins, "and here, her knees. I thought they were growing pains. My mother had always described them to me when I was a child. It's the bones growing. It's normal," I said, stroking her hair. I gave her a 250 milligram acetaminophen, the strawberry-flavored one for children that she usually took without problems. That day, however, she had trouble swallowing. "It hurts here too," she said, touching her throat. "Your throat too?" I asked, worried. "Maybe you're getting a bit of flu, sweetheart." I sent her to school anyway. Now thinking back, I feel guilty about that decision. But how could I have known? How could a normal mother, without medical training, imagine what was hiding behind such common symptoms? In the following weeks, the leg pain increased. Alessia complained more and more often. In the morning, she had trouble getting out of bed. "Mommy, I can't do it," she'd say with tears in her eyes. I had to help her get dressed, something I hadn't done since she was 4. Her legs hurt so much she limped. But there was more. Alessia was increasingly tired, pale. The teacher stopped me one day at school pickup. "Mrs. Moretti, I wanted to talk to you about Alessia. She's different lately. She falls asleep during lessons. Today she fainted during recess." "She fainted?" I asked, alarmed. "How did she faint?" "She was in the courtyard, playing ball with her classmates. Suddenly she collapsed." We immediately called the school doctor, but by the time he examined her, Alessia had already recovered. She said she just felt a bit dizzy. The doctor said it could be low blood pressure, but he suggested you have some tests done. That evening, I observed my daughter more carefully. Pale skin, almost transparent. Dark circles under her eyes. Her lips that used to be a bright pink, now were almost white. And then, there were the bruises. Small, purplish bruises on her arms and legs that seemed to appear out of nowhere. "Alessia, how did you get these bruises?" "I don't know, Mommy. I didn't bump into anything, I swear." She was losing her appetite. "I'm not hungry, Mommy," she'd repeat, pushing away her plate. And this was the strangest thing of all. Alessia, who had always eaten heartily, who asked for seconds, who stole snacks from the pantry when she thought I wasn't looking. Now she left her food almost untouched. Her favorite dish, the tagliatelle with meat sauce I made every Thursday, remained on her plate. "Don't you like it anymore?" I asked, surprised. "Yes, I like it, but I can't eat. My stomach feels full." In 3 weeks, she lost almost 3 kilos. For a 7-year-old girl who weighed 24 kilos, it was a significant loss. Her clothes hung on her. Her cheeks that had always been chubby were now hollow. She suddenly seemed older, but in an unnatural, sick way. In June, I could no longer ignore the signs. I took her to the pediatrician. Dr. Colombo, a man in his 60s with gray hair and a fatherly manner, had been following Alessia since birth. It was he who'd examined her when she had chickenpox at 4. He who'd treated her ear infection at 5. He who'd reassured me when she had a high fever at 6. I trusted him completely. That morning he examined her with an attention I'd never seen from him before. He had her undressed completely, something he usually didn't do for a routine check. He touched the lymph nodes in her neck, first one side, then the other, then those under her armpits, then those in the groin. He palpated them for a long time, focused. He looked at her gums, opening Alessia's mouth gently. "Does it hurt here?" he'd ask. "No, doctor." "And here?" "A little bit." He palpated her spleen, pressing gently on the left side of her abdomen. Alessia winced. "Does it hurt?" "A little, yes." The doctor made a face I didn't like at all. Then he looked at her arms, legs, counting the bruises. He'd counted at least 15. He took note of everything, writing quickly on the medical chart. Then he looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. It was the look of someone who knows they have to give terrible news, but is still searching for the right words. "Mrs. Moretti, I'd like to do some blood tests. Today, if possible." I felt my heart race. "But what do you think it is, doctor?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm in front of Alessia. "I'd prefer not to make premature hypotheses," he replied, but his tone was grave. "Let's do the tests, and then we'll talk calmly. But I'd like you to go to the laboratory immediately. I've already called. They're expecting you." "Immediately? Is it that urgent?" My voice trembled. "Mrs. Moretti," he said, lowering his voice and glancing at Alessia, who was getting dressed. "The symptoms your daughter is presenting, the fatigue, bone pain, spontaneous bruising, weight loss, enlarged spleen, can be indicative of various conditions, some of which require immediate intervention. I prefer to be cautious." I understood. Or rather, part of me understood what he didn't want to say explicitly. Something serious. Something very serious. That same evening we were at the laboratory on Via Giambellino. It was one of those private diagnostic centers where you usually go for routine exams, the ones you book weeks in advance. But Dr. Colombo had called personally, had asked to see us immediately. They let us go ahead of all the other patients in the waiting room. The nurse who did the blood draw was young, about 25, with delicate hands. But even she, after seeing the doctor's request, had a strange expression. She took 6 vials of blood. Alessia cried when she saw the needle. She'd always been scared of needles. "Mommy, I don't want to. It hurts." "Sweetheart, you have to be brave. It's important. Close your eyes and think of something nice." I held her hand while the nurse inserted the needle. Alessia squeezed hard, very hard, and sobbed quietly the whole time. When it was over, they gave her a lollipop and a bandage with Winnie the Pooh on it. "You were so brave," said the nurse, smiling, but her eyes were sad. They told us the results would arrive the next day. 24 hours that had to pass. 24 hours of waiting. It was the longest night of my life. Stefano tried to reassure me. "You'll see it's nothing. Maybe she's just a bit anemic. Girls at this age are sometimes anemic. It's normal." But I knew it wasn't normal. I felt deep down, with that instinct that only mothers have, that something was wrong. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Stefano's regular breathing beside me. And I prayed. I prayed like I'd never prayed before. "God, please, let it be nothing serious. Please, protect her. She's just a child." The next day, which was a Friday, Dr. Colombo called us personally on our cell phone. He didn't send a message, didn't make us wait for the results to arrive by email or for us to go pick them up. He called, at 9 o'clock in the morning precisely. "Mrs. Moretti, I need to see you. Today, in my office." "Have the results arrived?" I asked with a strangled voice. "Yes, but I'd prefer to discuss them in person. Can you come in an hour? With your husband, if possible." Stefano asked for urgent leave from work. An hour later, we were in his office, sitting in front of his desk, cluttered with medical files and manuals. Alessia had stayed with my mother. We didn't want her to hear. Not yet. Dr. Colombo had Alessia's test results in front of him. He'd read and reread them. This was evident from the underlines and notes written in the margins. When he raised his eyes to us, I saw they were glistening. "I'm sorry," he began, and those 2 words froze my blood. "I'm truly sorry." Alessia's blood values are very concerning. Stefano took my hand. He squeezed it so hard it hurt, but I barely noticed. The white blood cell count is extremely high, 125,000 per microliter, when the normal value for a child is between 4,000 and 10,000. Red blood cells instead are very low, 2 million per microliter instead of the normal 4.5 million. Platelets are at 20,000 instead of between 150,000 and 400,000. Hemoglobin is at 6 grams per deciliter instead of 12. He was speaking, but I struggled to understand. Numbers, values, medical terms I didn't know. What? What does it mean? I managed to stammer. It means that Alessia's bone marrow isn't functioning correctly. Instead of producing healthy blood cells, it's producing abnormal cells. Blast cells, we call them. They're immature tumorous cells. Tumorous, that word. No, I whispered. No, it can't be. I need to send you urgently to a pediatric hematologist. I've already made an appointment for tomorrow morning at San Gerardo Hospital in Monza. Dr. Ferrante is one of the best specialists in Italy for this type of pathology. But what pathology are we talking about exactly? Stefano asked in a hoarse voice. Dr. Colombo hesitated a moment. Then he said, "The symptoms Alessia is presenting, the bone pain, fatigue, bruising, weight loss, enlarged spleen, combined with these blood values, everything indicates the possibility of leukemia, but only the specialists at San Gerardo can make a definitive diagnosis with more thorough tests." Leukemia. The world crashed down on me. That word you only heard on television, in tearjerker movies, in tragic stories of sick children. Leukemia, cancer, my 7-year-old daughter who loved ballet, who ran happily in the courtyard, who always laughed. It wasn't possible. There had to be a mistake. There had to be. Is there a possibility it's a mistake? That the tests are wrong? I asked desperately, clinging to any thread of hope. I had the samples rechecked twice, the doctor replied kindly. Unfortunately, there's no mistake. But listen, Mrs. Moretti, Mr. Moretti. He looked at both of us intensely. Childhood leukemia, if caught in time and treated properly, has good chances of recovery. Very good. It's not a death sentence. It's a serious illness, yes, but treatable. Treatable. I clung to that word, but there was no mistake. The next day, Saturday morning, we were at San Gerardo Hospital in Monza. It's a large modern hospital, specialized in pediatrics. The pediatric hematology department was on the 4th floor, in the West Wing. I remember every detail of that journey. The main entrance with automatic glass doors, the huge atrium with green plants in large pots, the slow elevator that seemed never to arrive, the long 4th floor corridor with walls painted blue and children's drawings hanging. Dr. Ferrante received us in his office. He was a man in his 50s, tall, with thick-lensed glasses and a stern but kind air. He had 30 years of experience, said a plaque on the wall. He examined Alessia meticulously. He asked her questions, palpated her everywhere, carefully looked at every symptom. Then he sat down and looked at the test results in silence. Alessia played peacefully with a doll, unaware. "I must be honest with you," he finally said. "The clinical symptoms and blood values are very indicative of acute lymphoblastic leukemia. But to have absolute certainty, we need to do a bone marrow biopsy." The biopsy was done that same day. Alessia was sedated, but Stefano and I waited outside in a silent corridor, our hearts in our throats. The results arrived the following Monday. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia type B. It was no longer a suspicion. It was a certainty. "We must start chemotherapy immediately," said Dr. Ferrante. "Alessia must be admitted today. We have a complete remission rate in 80% of cases, but I must be honest, it will be a long and difficult journey." That same afternoon, Alessia was admitted. They gave her a room in the pediatric hematology ward, small but colorful, with walls painted with butterflies and rainbows. An attempt to make a place that remained a hospital less traumatic. Alessia cried when she realized she had to stay there. "I want to go home, Mommy." The next day, they inserted the central venous catheter, the porta cath, under the skin of her chest. The procedure was done in the operating room. Alessia was so scared. "Mommy, I don't want to go." The nurses had to carry her away while she screamed my name. The first days with the portacath were terrible. It hurt her even to breathe deeply. The actual chemotherapy began a week later. The protocol was called IEOP BFM All 2000. Vincristine, daunorubicin, asparaginase, prednisone. Complicated names, powerful drugs that would kill the leukemic cells, but also the healthy cells. The first cycles of chemotherapy were devastating. Alessia vomited continuously, hours and hours. Even when she had nothing left in her stomach, she continued with dry heaves that left her exhausted and in tears. "Mommy, enough! I can't take it anymore!" She'd cry, clinging to me, and I couldn't do anything but hold her hair while she vomited into the basin. Wipe her mouth with damp cloths, whisper that it would pass. But it didn't pass. The vomiting continued, relentless, cruel. Her hair started falling out after the second cycle. At first it was just a few strands on her pajama shoulder, then more, then in whole clumps. In the morning the pillow was covered with chestnut curls. One day Alessia looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and burst into tears. "I'm ugly, Mommy. I look like a monster. My friends won't recognize me anymore." I bought her colorful bandanas, little hats with her favorite princesses, Cinderella, Snow White, Ariel. But nothing could really console her. She was ashamed. When a school friend came to visit her in the hospital, she'd put on the bandana even if it was hot, even if it bothered her. She didn't want them to see her bald. And then there were the mouth sores. Mucositis, the doctors called it. Painful ulcers that covered her entire mouth, cheeks, tongue, palate. Alessia couldn't eat. Even drinking a sip of water was torture. "It burns, Mommy! It burns!" she'd cry. They gave her painkillers, but they weren't enough. Her mouth hurt so much she couldn't even speak properly. She communicated with gestures, with eyes full of tears. Her weight dropped dramatically. In 3 months, she lost 6 kilos. From 24 kilos, she went down to 18. For a 7-year-old girl, it was very serious. Her arms and legs were as thin as twigs. You could see her ribs through her skin. Her face was hollow. Her eyes seemed enormous in that emaciated little face. She looked like a child from concentration camps. No longer my chubby, healthy Alessia. She was a skeleton. A skeleton with my daughter's eyes. They gave her IVs with parenteral nutrition because she couldn't eat enough. Through the portacath, they pumped proteins, fats, vitamins directly into her blood. But even so, she continued to lose weight. Her body consumed everything, burned everything, fighting the disease and the poisons of chemo. And then there were infections. Alessia's immune system was almost non-existent. The white blood cell count was very low. Any bacteria, any virus could be lethal. They kept her in isolation for weeks. I could only visit her after thoroughly washing my hands, wearing a gown, gloves, mask. Sometimes, when the fever got too high, even I couldn't enter. I could only see her through glass, and she'd look at me from the other side crying silently. Once she had septicemia, very high fever, 39.5, 40 degrees Celsius. She shook violently, her small body shaken by chills that seemed like convulsions. Doctors rushed into the room, attached new IVs, high-dose antibiotics. For 3 days, she remained between life and death. The doctors prepared us for the worst. "Mrs. Moretti, the situation is critical. The next 24 hours will be decisive." I didn't move from her bedside. Stefano had to return to work. He couldn't take more leave. But I stayed there, sitting next to the bed, holding Alessia's little hand in mine. It was so small, that little hand. So cold despite the fever. I caressed her fingertips, one by one, and prayed. I prayed non-stop, mechanically. "Hail Mary, our Father, Hail Mary, our Father." The words came out of my lips without me almost realizing it. Alessia survived that crisis. The fever went down. The infection was subdued by antibiotics. But it was only the first of many emergencies. Every week seemed to bring a new problem, a new complication. Nosebleeds that wouldn't stop. Excruciating abdominal pain. Temporary kidney failure. Her poor little body fought on 1,000 different fronts. I had to leave my part-time job at the boutique. I couldn't take care of anything but my daughter anymore. The owner was understanding. Go to your daughter. Work can wait. She needs you." But I knew that without my salary, even if small, it would be difficult. Stefano worked double shifts, sometimes triple, to support the family. He'd come home exhausted, at 11 at night, eat standing up, sleep 5 hours and leave again. His hair in a few months turned gray. He seemed to have aged 10 years. My parents came from Bergamo and stayed in Milan to help us. My mother cooked, cleaned the house, did the shopping. My father drove Stefano to work in his car to save gas. They did everything they could, but you could see they too were destroyed. My mother, every evening, recited the rosary for hours. Trembling hands, red eyes. "She has to get better," she'd whisper. "She has to." We practically lived at the hospital. We'd only return home for brief periods between one chemo cycle and the next, when Alessia's blood values recovered enough to let her go out. But even at home, we had to take 1,000 precautions. No visitors, no outings. Everything had to be constantly disinfected. Alessia lived in a sterile bubble, isolated from the world. It was during one of these rare returns home, in September 2005, that I met Carlo in the elevator. I was exhausted, mentally and physically destroyed. I was carrying heavy grocery bags. I'd had to buy special food for Alessia, bland foods that maybe she could swallow without vomiting, and he was coming home from school. He had his backpack on his shoulders, a notebook in hand. He'd recently started high school at Lyon III, if I remember correctly. He saw me and immediately helped me with the bags without my asking. A simple gesture, automatic, natural to him. "How is Alessia?" he asked me with a tone of real concern. It wasn't the formal question everyone asked. There wasn't that subtle embarrassment I noticed in people's looks when they met me. It was a sincere, direct question, full of real empathy. That simple question made me collapse. Maybe it was the fatigue accumulated over months. Maybe it was the fact that everyone asked me, "How's it going?" with that look of pity I hated, but no one had ever asked me simply directly how my daughter was. Maybe it was the tone of his voice. That mix of maturity and sweetness that didn't seem to belong to a 14-year-old boy. I started crying there, in that elevator, in front of this teenager I barely knew. Tears fell uncontrollably, and I couldn't stop them. "Bad," I finally managed to whisper. "She's very bad. The leukemia isn't responding well to chemo like they'd hoped. The values improve a bit, then worsen again. It's a constant up and down. And Alessia suffers so much." My voice broke. "Dr. Ferrante says we're still within the range of possibilities, but I see my daughter fading day by day. She's becoming smaller and smaller, weaker and weaker. Sometimes I look at her and I think that..." I couldn't continue. I couldn't say those terrible words that tormented my mind every night. That maybe my daughter wouldn't make it. That maybe I was losing her. Carlo remained silent for a long moment. The elevator had arrived at our floor, but he didn't get out. He kept the button pressed to hold the doors open. He looked at me with those dark, serious eyes, and there was something in that look I couldn't describe. Compassion, yes, but also something else, an understanding that went beyond his young age. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You know what I do when I'm afraid or worried? I go before the Blessed Sacrament. Jesus in the Eucharist is truly present. It's not just a symbol. It's really him there, in body, blood, soul, and divinity. When I talk to him, I know he truly listens to me. When I entrust my worries to him, I know he can do something." I looked at him surprised. I was still drying my tears with the back of my hand. He was so young, yet he spoke with a conviction that I, at 36, had never had. There was a certainty in his voice that struck me deeply. "I don't know if it works," I replied bitterly. Desperation made me honest, raw. "I pray so much, you know. I pray every night, every morning, every single moment when I'm not doing something else. I recite rosary after rosary. I do novenas. I light candles in church. But Alessia gets worse, or rather, doesn't improve fast enough. The leukemic cells decrease too slowly. The doctors talk about second-line protocols, more aggressive. And I keep praying, but I don't see any miracle." Carlo listened with absolute attention. He didn't have that bored or embarrassed air that teenagers usually have when adults vent their problems. He was completely present, completely focused on me and my words. "Keep praying," he said with that disarming simplicity he had. "But try praying differently. Don't just pray asking, begging. Try praying by giving thanks. Thank Him already now for the healing that has yet to come, because it will come. I know it. Those last words, I know it, were said with such certainty that they left me breathless. It wasn't hope. It wasn't optimism. It was certainty. Carlo, you can't know, I began, but he shook his head decisively. Mrs. Moretti, he said, and his face became even more serious. I pray for Alessia every day before the Blessed Sacrament. I spend hours there after school, and in those hours, while I look at Jesus in the consecrated host, I feel things. It's hard to explain. It's not a voice, not precise words. But it's as if Jesus makes me understand certain things deep in my heart. And regarding Alessia, I know inside me with absolute certainty that Jesus has made me understand that your daughter will be healed. He stared straight into my eyes. Carlo's eyes were extraordinarily intense in that moment. They had nothing of the naivety typical of a teenager. They were eyes that seemed to have seen things others didn't see, that knew things others didn't know. You just need to have faith, he continued, even when it seems impossible, even when doctors say otherwise, even when all evidence suggests things are going badly. You must have faith. Your daughter will be healed. I promise you. That word, promise, resonated in the elevator like a bell. It wasn't a simple phrase of comfort. It wasn't a, "You'll see everything will be okay," said out of kindness. It wasn't one of those cliches people repeat without really thinking about it. It was a promise, a solemn promise, said with a gravity that literally left me speechless. "You promise?" I repeated weakly. "But Carlo, you're just a boy. You can't promise such a thing. The doctors themselves don't dare make promises. How can you—" "I'm not promising you something I'll do," he interrupted me calmly. "I'm promising you something Jesus will do. Through my prayers, yes, but above all through His love and His power. I'm just an instrument." "But Jesus can do anything, and He has chosen to heal your daughter. I'm certain of it." I stood there, blocked, with the grocery bag still in hand, looking at this 14-year-old boy who was making me the most incredible, most impossible promise anyone had ever made me. "Now I'm going to church," said Carlo, releasing the elevator button and getting out. "I'm going to the parish, to Santa Maria Segreta. I'm going to pray for Alessia, and I'll continue to do so, every day, until she's healed." He turned to leave, then turned one last time. "Remember, Mrs. Moretti, Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist. Don't just go to church on Sunday out of habit. Go when you're afraid, when you feel alone, when you think you can't make it. Jesus is there waiting for you, always." And he left, leaving me there on the third-floor landing, completely dazed. I entered the house like a sleepwalker. I put away the groceries mechanically. Alessia was sleeping in her bed, small and pale under the covers. I sat next to her and watched her for a long time. Part of me wanted desperately to believe him. That promise, "Your daughter will be healed," was exactly what my broken heart wanted to hear. The other part, the rational one, the one that had heard doctors talk about unfavorable percentages and salvage protocols, the one that had seen Alessia vomit blood and cry from pain, thought he was just a boy too young and idealistic to understand how serious the situation really was. A boy with so much faith, but with little experience of reality's cruelty. But those words, "Your daughter will be healed, I promise you," kept echoing in my mind. I couldn't shake them off. And that evening, when Alessia woke up and asked, "Mommy, will I go home soon?" Instead of giving her the usual evasive answer, I said with a firmness I didn't know I had, "Yes, love, you'll be healed soon? I'm sure of it." I don't know why I said it with that conviction. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the extreme need to cling to any hope. Or maybe, in some deep part of me, I'd believed that extraordinary boy. I'd believed his impossible promise. That evening, while Alessia slept in her little bed, still worn from the last chemo cycle, I thought about those words. A 14-year-old boy telling me to have faith. I was a bit ashamed of myself. I went to my room and took the rosary my grandmother had given me for my first communion. It had been years since I'd really recited it, with my heart. I did it that evening. The weeks passed. October arrived with its autumn colors that Alessia couldn't even see, closed within the four walls of her hospital room. The results of the latest tests were discouraging. The leukemic cells were decreasing, but too slowly. Dr. Ferrante started talking about second-line protocols, more aggressive. There are other drugs we can try, he said, but they have heavier side effects. And if even those don't work, he left the sentence hanging. But I understood perfectly what he meant. There was the possibility of a bone marrow transplant, and there was the possibility that my daughter wouldn't make it. I was desperate. Completely, totally desperate. Stefano tried to maintain control, to be the family's rock, but I saw him collapse at night when he thought I was sleeping. He cried silently, his shoulders trembling. My parents came to visit us every day, but even they didn't know what to say, what to do anymore. Friends brought me food I didn't touch, offered to help with shopping, with chores. But what did I care about shopping when my daughter was dying? It was on one of those darkest days that I met Carlo again. It was a Friday afternoon. I needed to get some changes of clothes from home before going back to the hospital. He was entering the building just as I was leaving. "Mrs. Moretti," he called me. "How is Alessia?" And again I collapsed. Maybe because he was the only one who asked me that question without that unbearable look of pity. Maybe because his young age made me feel I could be honest without worrying about appearing strong. "The doctors say the therapies aren't working well enough. They're talking about more aggressive treatments, but..." My voice broke. "But I'm afraid, Carlo. I'm so afraid of losing her." Carlo looked straight into my eyes. He didn't look away, didn't lower his head embarrassed like teenagers usually do. He looked at me with a seriousness that didn't belong to his 14 years. "Mrs. Moretti, I have to tell you something. And I know it will sound strange, maybe you'll think I'm crazy. But I have to tell you." I waited, confused. "Your daughter will be healed," he said with absolute calm. "I don't know how. I don't know exactly when. But she will be healed. I promise you." I was left speechless. That wasn't a simple phrase of comfort. It wasn't a, "You'll see everything will be okay," or a, "Have faith." It was a promise said with a certainty that left me breathless. "Carlo, you can't know," I began, but he shook his head. "I pray for Alessia every day before the Blessed Sacrament. And I know inside me, that Jesus has made me understand that your daughter will be healed. You just need to have faith. Even when it seems impossible, even when doctors say otherwise, your daughter will be healed." He stared at me for another moment, then added, "Now I'm going to church, to the parish. I'm going to pray for Alessia, and I'll continue to do so." He left, leaving me there, in the building's entrance, completely stunned. Part of me wanted desperately to believe him. The other part, the rational one, the one that had heard doctors talk about unfavorable percentages and salvage protocols, thought he was just a boy too young to understand how serious the situation was. But those words, "Your daughter will be healed, I promise you," kept echoing in my mind. That evening at the hospital, I looked at Alessia sleeping with different eyes. She seemed so fragile, so small in that bed that was too big. She had a pale, waxy face, deep dark circles that hollowed her face. You could see the veins under her transparent skin, thin as tissue paper. The portacath protruded under the hospital gown, an unnatural bulge on her tiny chest. The monitors emitted their regular beeps, tracking her vital parameters with green and red lines that went up and down. Numbers, graphs, data that told the story of the battle being fought inside her small body. And I thought, but what if a 14-year-old boy has more faith than me? If he believes so firmly with such absolute certainty that Alessia will be healed, why can't I believe it? What does he have that I don't have? That night, next to my daughter's bed, I made a decision. I would believe. Even if it seemed crazy, even if it seemed illogical, even against all rational evidence, I would believe Carlo's promise. I began to pray differently from that night. No longer desperate prayers full of fear, full of anguish and terror. I prayed giving thanks, as Carlo had suggested. Thank you, Jesus, for Alessia's healing. Thank you for the miracle I know you'll perform. Thank you because my daughter will come home healthy and strong. I felt ridiculous at first. How could I give thanks for something that hadn't happened yet? but Carlo's words gave me a strange strength. A week passed. Then 2. Alessia started the new chemotherapy protocol, the more aggressive one. The side effects were terrible. Very high fever, continuous infections. They kept her in isolation for days. I could only see her through glass, fully dressed in gown, gloves, and mask when I entered. "Mommy, when am I going home?" she'd ask me with her weak little voice. "Soon, love, soon." But despite all this, I kept repeating that promise like a mantra. "She'll be healed. Carlo said she'll be healed." Stefano looked at me worried. "Honey, I know you want to believe it, but we have to be realistic. The doctors—" "I know what the doctors say." I interrupted him with more vehemence than I intended. "But I also know that that boy, Carlo Acutis, looked me in the eyes and promised me our daughter will be healed. And I believe him." I met Carlo a few more times in the following weeks. Every time he asked me about Alessia, and every time he repeated the same thing: "Keep praying, and remember, she will be healed." Once I saw him leaving the church of Santa Maria Segreta with his mother. He had a worn rosary in his hand. When he saw me, he approached. "Today I did an hour of adoration for Alessia," he said simply. A 14-year-old boy who spent an hour on his knees before the tabernacle for a girl he barely knew. I was moved. It was the 3rd week of November when something strange happened. Alessia had just finished another particularly heavy chemo cycle. We were all prepared for the usual course: nausea, vomiting, fever, weakness. Instead, that morning she woke up and said, "Mommy, I'm hungry." She was hungry. For the first time in months, she was asking for food. "Do you want some rusks? Some milk?" "No, I want pasta with tomato sauce, like you make it." The nurse who was checking her parameters smiled. "It's a good sign, ma'am. When they have an appetite, it means the body is responding well." But I knew it was more than that. Something was changing. In the following days, Alessia seemed stronger. Her face regained color. She complained less about pain. She played with the dolls we'd brought her to the hospital. Dr. Ferrante was cautiously optimistic. "Let's see the next blood tests. Let's not make premature assumptions." The tests arrived 3 days later. The doctor entered the room with an expression I couldn't decipher. He sat next to Alessia's bed and looked at the papers in hand. Then he raised his eyes to us. "The values are improved. Significantly. The leukemic cells have decreased much more than expected. The red blood cell count is rising. It's excellent." "So it's working? The chemo is working?" I asked, not daring to hope too much yet. "It certainly seems so. If it continues like this, we could talk about complete remission sooner than I thought." That evening, I called my mother crying. "She's better, Mom. She's really better." And she, who'd raised me on rosaries and novenas, simply said, "I told you prayers work." But I knew it wasn't just prayers. Or rather, it wasn't just my prayers. It was the prayers of that extraordinary boy named Carlo Acutis. It was his hours before the Blessed Sacrament. It was his unshakable faith. It was his promise. We continued with the therapies, but the improvement was constant. Every week that passed, Alessia became stronger. In December, for the first time in months, she could come home for a few days. It was Christmas, and having my daughter sitting at the table with us, weak but alive, was the greatest gift I could receive. I met Carlo in the building's courtyard on December 24th. He was carrying packages to the car, probably gifts for relatives. When he saw me, he smiled. "How is Alessia?" "Better," I replied, and this time my voice didn't tremble. "Much better. The doctors are optimistic." "I told you," he said simply, without arrogance, just as a fact. "She'll be completely healed. You just need to be patient." "Carlo," I began, with tears in my eyes, "I don't know how to thank you. Your prayers—" "You don't need to thank me," he interrupted me gently. "Thank Jesus. I'm just an instrument. But I'm happy, truly happy for Alessia." The last chemotherapy cycle ended in January 2006. Dr. Ferrante called us to his office at the end of the month to discuss the results of the latest tests. Stefano and I entered with our hearts in our throats. We'd learned in those months that things could change in an instant, that an improvement could be followed by a relapse. The doctor made us sit and opened Alessia's medical file. "Mr. and Mrs. Moretti," he began, and I held my breath. "I have here the results of the last blood test and bone marrow biopsy of Alessia." He paused what seemed like an eternity. "There are no more leukemic cells, not even one. Alessia is in complete remission." I burst into tears. Stefano hugged me tight, and he too had glistening eyes. Is it over?" I asked through sobs. "Is it really over?" "She'll have to continue with maintenance therapy for another year, for safety," the doctor explained. "And we'll have to do regular checkups for at least 5 years. But yes, clinically speaking, your daughter is healed." Healed. That word. That wonderful, impossible word. Dr. Ferrante added, "I must be honest with you. Given how the initial values had started, given how badly she'd responded to the first chemo cycles, I didn't expect such a complete and rapid remission. It's almost miraculous. Almost miraculous. I knew there was no almost about it. It was a miracle that a 14-year-old boy had promised me months earlier. But the definitive confirmation came a few weeks later. It was mid-February, and we had to do a routine checkup. Dr. Ferrante wanted to repeat all the tests, including another bone marrow biopsy, to be absolutely certain the remission was holding. We returned to San Gerardo, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. Alessia, even though still bald from chemo, was smiling. She joked with the nurses. She was my lively girl again. We waited for the results, sitting in the hematology department waiting room. I recognized some faces, other families, other sick children. Some would make it, others wouldn't. I prayed silently for all of them. When Dr. Ferrante called us to his office, he had a very strange expression. He seemed confused, almost incredulous. He made us sit and remained silent for a long moment, staring at the reports in front of him. "I don't understand," he finally said, more to himself than to us. "I really don't understand." "What don't you understand, doctor?" Stefano asked, alarmed. "Is something wrong?" No, he hastened to reassure us. "On the contrary, it's just the opposite. It's that," he ran a hand through his hair. "You see, when a pediatric patient reaches complete remission from acute lymphoblastic leukemia, it's normal to still find some trace of the disease at a microscopic level. Minimal residual cells that are no longer detectable in normal blood tests, but that we can identify with more sophisticated techniques in the biopsy. That's why we do maintenance therapy, to eliminate those too." We waited for him to continue. "But in Alessia's case," he shook his head. "There's nothing, absolutely nothing. It's as if she'd never had leukemia. Her marrow is completely clean, healthy. Better than that of many children who've never been sick. I had the samples rechecked 3 times because I thought there was an error." "But is that a bad thing?" I asked, confused. "No, Mrs. Moretti. It's extraordinary. In 30 years of my career, I've never seen such a total and rapid remission in a case that had started so badly. Alessia's cells at the beginning didn't respond well to chemo. The protocols we used should have brought her into remission, yes, but gradually, with probably some relapses to manage. Instead, it's as if at a certain point her body simply decided to heal. Completely, instantly." He looked me straight in the eyes. "Mrs. Moretti, I'm a man of science. My training leads me to look for rational medical explanations for everything that happens. But in this case, I must admit I have no explanations. Alessia is healed, and I can't tell you exactly why or how." I felt tears running down my face. "But I know why," I said quietly. "A boy made me a promise. He told me my daughter would be healed, and he was right." The doctor didn't ask more. Maybe he thought I was talking about a promise made by Alessia herself, or by someone close to her. It didn't matter. I knew. I knew that Carlo Acutis, with his prayers, with his unshakable faith, had obtained this miracle. We left the hospital that day with Alessia happily skipping, finally free from needles and IVs. "Mommy, can I go back to school? Can I go back to ballet?" "Yes, love. You can do everything again." When we got home, I absolutely wanted to thank Carlo. We went up to the 3rd floor and rang the bell. Mrs. Antonia opened. "Clarissa, how are you? How's little Alessia?" The child peeked from behind me, smiling, and the lady brought a hand to her chest. "Oh, how wonderful! How you've grown, sweetheart." "She's healed," I said, and my voice broke. "She's completely healed. And I wanted to thank Carlo. I know he prayed so much for her." Mrs. Antonia's face softened. "Carlo's not home now. He went to church. But yes, he prayed so much. Every day, without ever missing one. He'd do hours of Eucharistic adoration for your little girl. When I'd ask him if it wasn't too much, he'd always tell me, 'Mom, Jesus can do miracles, and he will for Alessia.' He had such faith." I couldn't hold back anymore. I burst into tears right there at the door. Mrs. Antonia hugged me. "We're so happy for you. So happy." I met Carlo the next day, on Sunday, coming out of Mass. I saw him at the back of the church, kneeling in prayer, even after the liturgy had ended. I waited. When he finally got up and turned, our eyes met. I approached him, with Alessia by the hand. The girl recognized him. "Hi, Carlo," she said cheerfully. He bent down to her height. "Hi, Alessia. I see you're well." "I'm great. The doctor said I'm healed." Carlo smiled and stroked her head. Then he looked at me. I said nothing for a moment. What could I say? Thank you? It seemed too little. You saved my daughter? It was the truth, but it sounded exaggerated. In the end, I simply whispered, "You were right. She's healed, just like you promised." "I knew it," he said with simplicity. "Jesus had made me understand. I'm happy you kept the faith even in the most difficult moments." "Carlo, I don't know how to thank you. You—" "Mrs. Moretti," he interrupted me gently. "I didn't do anything special. I just prayed. What healed Alessia is God's power, not mine. I'm just happy to have been able to be a channel." He hugged me, a quick and somewhat embarrassed hug like that of a 14-year-old, and then left with his mother. I watched him walk away, that thin boy with the red polo shirt and backpack on his shoulders, and I understood I'd met a saint, a living saint, a 14-year-old boy who talked to Jesus as if he were his best friend. Alessia continued maintenance therapy throughout 2006, pills to take at home, monthly checkups. But she was well. She went back to school, resumed ballet. Her hair started growing back, this time curlier than before. She regained weight. She became again the lively, full-of-life child she'd always been. Every checkup confirmed complete remission. Every biopsy showed a perfectly healthy bone marrow. Dr. Ferrante would shake his head every time. "It's incredible," he kept repeating. "Truly incredible." I saw Carlo from time to time, always kind, always smiling. He continued with his normal high school life, with homework, friends, soccer. But he also continued with his hours of adoration, with his deep faith. I'd see him at Sunday Mass, always in the front row, always completely absorbed in prayer. Then came October 2006. I remember it was a beautiful autumn day, with that warm sun illuminating the golden leaves. Alessia was doing homework at the kitchen table when I heard excited voices on the landing. I went out and saw Mrs. Antonia talking with another neighbor. She had a devastated face, red eyes. "I have to go to the hospital," she was saying. "Carlo is sick, very sick." My heart froze. "What happened?" "I don't know exactly," she replied with a trembling voice. "He'd had a sore throat for a few days. We thought it was flu. But this morning, he fainted. They took him urgently to San Gerardo. The doctors are talking about leukemia. Leukemia, that cursed word. That word I knew all too well." "No," I whispered. "No, it can't be." But it was true. Carlo Acutis, the boy who had prayed for my daughter's healing, the boy who had such strong faith he could promise miracles, was sick with the same disease. The cruel irony of that situation hit me like a punch in the stomach. The following days were a nightmare. Carlo's illness progressed rapidly, much more rapidly than what had happened to Alessia. In a few days, it was clear there was no more hope. Fulminant M3 leukemia, someone told me. I prayed desperately. "Jesus, save him. As you saved my daughter, save him, please." But Jesus had other plans. On October 12, 2006, Carlo Acutis died. He was only 15 years old. At his funeral, the Church of Santa Maria Segreta was packed. Everyone spoke of him as a saint. I cried for hours. I cried for that extraordinary boy who had given me hope when I had none left. I cried for his family destroyed by grief. I cried for the injustice of a boy so good, so full of faith, taken away so soon. But then, with time, I began to understand. Carlo had lived his life with an intensity that few adults reach. He had loved Jesus completely, totally. He had used every moment to do good, to pray, to help others. He had obtained miracles with his faith, and perhaps his premature death wasn't a tragedy but a calling. Jesus wanted him with him. Today, as I write this, many years have passed. Alessia is a 27-year-old woman, healthy, strong, full of life. She's a medical graduate. She wants to become a pediatric oncologist. Mom, she often tells me, I want to help other children like someone helped me. Carlo Acutis was beatified in 2020. Blessed Carlo Acutis. When I saw the images of the beatification on television, I cried again, but this time they were tears of joy. The whole world now knows what I'd known for years, that boy was a saint. And every time I tell this story, every time someone asks me about Alessia's miracle, I always say the same thing. A 14-year-old boy made me a promise. He looked me in the eyes and told me my daughter would be healed. And he was right. Because when you pray with true faith, when you truly believe in God's power, miracles happen. Dr. Ferrante, now retired, when I meet him by chance, always smiles at me. You know, Mrs. Moretti, I still don't have a scientific explanation for Alessia's healing. In my career, I've seen many cases, many healings, but your daughter's case remains unique. And I reply, Doctor, some things science cannot explain. Some things require faith. Alessia keeps on her desk, while studying to become a doctor, a photo. It's a photo of Carlo Acutis, the one you find everywhere now, with his red polo shirt and kind smile. Underneath she's written, Thank you for saving my life. Pray for me from heaven so that I can help other children like you helped me. And I, every night before sleeping, recite the rosary. That same rosary of my grandmother's that I'd picked up again that evening after talking with Carlo in the elevator. And I pray for all the mothers who are living what I lived. I pray that they too can meet someone who gives them hope. I pray that they too can experience the power of faith. Because if a 14-year-old boy can promise you a miracle and keep it, then truly everything is possible. Truly nothing is impossible for God. If this story has touched your heart, entrust yourselves to the intercession of Blessed Carlo Acutis in your prayers. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and activate the bell so you don't miss other testimonies of faith that illuminate our journey.